So we're here for colloquium, the first of 2020. War Eagles. I almost said but we're here to hear from our guest speaker, Dr. Gragg, who has a BS in biochemistry from Binghamton University and an MS in pharmacology and a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from Florida A&M University. He is a professor of environmental science and policy at FAMU and in the School of the Environment. And he also serves as an academic advisor to the undergraduate research organization at FAMU. And he's co-chair of the HBCU Geosciences Working Group and president of the National Technical Association. So he has 27 years of leadership experience where he does a lot of work, both also in the consulting field of solving complex problems, devising solutions, and bridging differences between a diversity of stakeholders, and really reaching across disciplines. So this idea of interdisciplinariness. And so this is one of the reasons why he's here, is this idea of interdisciplinariness in our recently funded NSF NRT project. And he's bringing in a unique aspect of expertise, specifically within the environmental justice area. And he's had a lot of traditional disciplinary research where he's looked at various phenomenon from the pharmaceutical perspective and how marginalized populations are more at risk to some of these issues. But today he's going to present to us a little bit more about the education and teaching side of what he's doing in regard to environmental justice. All right, so without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Gragg.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be working with Karen and her group, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute something, and I'm sure everybody after me will be much better for the next lectures and stuff. But what I have here, before I get started, there were two things I wanted to point out. Basically what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit of the history of what I've done in environmental justice. But I'm really here to talk about how we can invite more students, especially students from underrepresented groups, or really anybody, through using art and also other culturally relevant ideas or issues to bring people into STEM. Instead of giving them just the STEM, give them the reason, and give them something they can relate to, like a problem they can solve or help understand through STEM. So from this creative side, or this whole issue of art and STEM, which now the National Academies of Science is recognizing this, NSF, and even the World Economic Forum is understanding the need to integrate art and science. So what I've been doing in all of my classes, this is the syllabus for a gen ed course that I teach for non-science majors, which is Fundamentals of Environmental Science. So for all of my classes, the students are required to, at the end of the course, depending on the course, they have to present in a group manner, in groups, what they've learned, but they have to do that in a creative fashion. So I've gotten art, which I bought, 2 pieces that I like. I've got music videos, I've got rap videos, digital games, all kinds of stuff. And what's amazing, I'm never sure that the students are getting anything in the course. Well, they all belong in the class. But then at the end of the class, and in what they're comfortable with, then it's apparent that they've learned something because they can express it in their own voice. So that was that purpose. So this is the instruction that they get for that. And I also have an artist come to the class. I have some of our collaborations. That's Kaguya Bowens. I have her come to class and help the students get on the path and see how they can use art and other creative aspects to do this group project. The other thing I just wanted to share on the syllabus, which I also try to convey to my students, is that science is not exclusive, and you don't have to be a scientist to understand science. So this is a quote that I share with them from Martin Luther King, which in my opinion is the foundation, or expresses the foundation or concepts of environmental science, and that we understand and teach and investigate the interrelationships of things, and we understand how things affect each other. And so I want to convey to them, again, that you don't have to be a scientist, and that we can look in other places to understand and especially to communicate science, where I think you would all agree that, unfortunately, we as scientists have fallen short of communicating our science to the general public. We sort of relegated that to non-scientists in this day and time. So I'm going to go to the slides. And so first I'm going to, this is my topic. I was supposed to give this talk, or a version of this talk, at the AGU meeting, but I wasn't able to make it at the last minute. So again, I'm happy to be able to share a version of it with you all. And just to make the point, the integrating humanities, arts with science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, that was the theme that you were submitting your work under. So even at AGU, they had a whole space for this topic. So in this past year, I gave this talk for Earth Day called Call for Environmental Justice. And the reason I gave it this title is because I started working in this area of environmental justice in 1998. We staffed our unit, our academic unit, staffed the Commission for Environmental Equity and Justice for the state of Florida. And so I was the research director, and we went around with the commission, or the commission went around the state and held these public meetings. The commission, one of their charges, and one of the questions they had to get answered was, are minority and low-wealth populations in the state of Florida disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards? So that was the research that we had to do. From there, I got into environmental justice in realizing that I could apply the science that I know, the toxicology, the biochemistry, to contributing to solutions or understanding or data that was needed for environmental justice. Because one of the main shortcomings or arguments about environmental justice was the lack of scientific data that was needed for people to make their case. That has been overcome. And if you pay attention to the news lately, you'll see there was a movie, a major movie that just came out about Parkersburg, Virginia, and the DuPont chemicals. That's all about environmental justice. So this call for environmental justice, the point I'm making with the title, is that despite the positive impact that the environmental justice movement has had on public policy in the United States, there's still a lot of work to do, and these communities are still calling for, justice, fair treatment, addressing their problems. And I think academic institutions, especially land-grant institutions, should be at the forefront of helping to solve or contribute to this, resolving this issue. All right, I think I can go over here. Where there is this thing called the environmental justice movement that started in the 80s, and they had this summit, and they called it the People of Color Environmental Leadership. And I mean, I don't have to read all this to you. So they had these principles of environmental justice, and what I said earlier, that if you do a little research, you'll find that the environmental justice movement has had a significant impact on public policy in the United States. So for example, the EPA now has an Office of Environmental Justice. They have environmental justice goals and policies and rules and regulations. The executive order 12898 under Bill Clinton, which instructed the executive branch to address environmental justice in their policy and rulemaking, that all emanated from actors which were not scientists. They were grassroots, community-based organizations that had this meeting and got organized and sought to address these issues that are still confronting communities. For example, we can talk about Flint, we're not going to, but that's a great current example. And there's many, many other examples. And Flint, Michigan is not the only community that has lead in its water. So again, I'm not going to read every thing, but the point I want to make as well, because one of the things we're talking about, we want to get more underrepresented groups into environmental science and STEM and geosciences especially. And I think there's for some people, they may think that people from minority populations are not interested in the environment. And I think this is one example in what's emanated from this movement to counter that story. And remember, when we say people, or if we think people are not interested, remember they're living in it. They're living and dealing with these issues, so we can't, there's no way you can come to the conclusion that they're living with the issue and they don't know what's going on or are concerned about what's going on, because if they're not concerned about themselves, they can see how it's affecting their children, right? And they're concerned for the impact for their children. So people of color, low-income populations are very concerned about the environment just like everybody else. So, what do we mean when we say environmental justice? And that's, well, what I have interpreted to mean is that we are collectively exposed, but some of us are uniquely challenged. And I think that's one of the risks of the environmental justice perspective, because people who don't see themselves in those groups, they don't think they are being harmed or exposed to environmental pollutants, environmental hazards, and that's simply not true. Environmental justice is dealing with the people who are disproportionately exposed, or cumulatively exposed, who live near, in close proximity to these environmental hazards. So this graphic is telling us about a report called Toxic Waste and Race that was published in the 80s. This was one of the first reports about environmental justice research studies, and it was just highly criticized and castigated that they didn't follow the appropriate methods, and it wasn't rigorous enough. Well, 20 years later, people from Michigan and other academic institutions redid this same study with more rigorous methods and analytical methods and came out with the same results. So that was 20 years later. And that's back to the title, this call for environmental justice. So the report, again, what is environmental justice? It's a lot of things. First and foremost, it's people in communities who live in close proximity to environmental hazards. And then these same populations that live in this proximity, they also suffer from what we call health disparities. What do we mean by disparities? That means that if you're 15% of the population, but your group represents 30% of the asthma cases, that's a disparity. help disparity. So how is that related to environmental justice? Well, if you look at the research from the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registries, where they tell us about the disease risk for exposure to certain contaminants, you'll see that the contaminants these communities are exposed to and the health outcomes they have match these risk profiles from the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. So the research, is, how can we further show some real hardcore evidence of that? And a lot of that work has been done. Well, what do we mean when we showed a report? Well, what's really going on the ground? And we have in Louisiana a region called the Cancer Alley or Cancer Corridor. So we have the Mississippi River, and we have all of these chemical facilities that are on the Mississippi River. But what else you have are the people in communities, what we call fence line communities, who live up and near these facilities and are being devastated by the constant and cumulative exposure and impact of environmental, these pollutants and hazards. But as well, again, on the collectively exposed, uniquely challenged, well, these facilities are putting stuff into the Mississippi River, which is flowing down into the Gulf. We pull stuff out, people eat stuff, and it is emitting stuff into the atmosphere that moves around. And of course, there are manufacturing products that we use that are problematic. There was a recent report now that's saying, I think it's monthly, that we are consuming about a credit card worth of microplastics in our what we consume here. That just came out a couple weeks ago. So always as scientists, and we look for opportunities, we look for challenges, and we look for the opportunities. And the thing I like about environmental justice and this whole interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approach, and I think we as scientists have to be more cognizant of, is that our work should, the public should be able to understand how our work is addressing real problems that people are confronted with on the street. I mean, I'm in Tallahassee, Florida. We're part of the state university system. All around the country, people are questioning the validity of higher education and all the money that's going to it. And I think in part that's because they don't see us out in the community and they don't see where we are really solving problems. We're not communicating with the public, meaning us, the fact that us, not the president, us, the scientists. So this issue of environmental justice is a great area to do that. And it also calls for us as faculty to start changing some of our expectations and criteria for junior faculty to become senior faculty. Because if we continue to hold on to these models that we've had, we're going to be in trouble. Because everything's changing to this whole interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. You can look at any National Science Foundation grant, anything. That's what they want. And that's what the people want in the street. All to be saying it, but they're definitely saying, cut that. They're making too much money. Why is the money going there? And we have to ask ourselves, why do they feel that way? And I've concluded because we're not out there demonstrating that we can contribute to solve problems. And producing students with degrees is not a problem that people have on the street or along this corridor, that Cancer Alley corridor. And some of us are doing the work, but we're not communicating it to the public. The impact of the environmental justice movement on public policy. Their work or that movement has informed this whole thing about sustainability and resiliency, because that's what they've been calling for. That's what they've been advocating for. So now we have people giving out grants all about sustainability, people giving degrees in sustainability. But that's great, because it's what we need, because it functions across discipline sectors, ways of knowing, geographic scales and temporal scales, which we should all be happy with as geoscientists. I hope that's what we understand what we're doing and what we're teaching the students. The other thing for sustainability, it's place-based, it's also values-based, and it's contextual. So we understand that there's not a one-size-fits-all, and we understand we're working with different populations in different situations. But with this integrative approach in collaborative work, we can help contribute to the understanding and solutions. And it's not only these quote-unquote problems, it's also how the world, technology, all of this stuff is changing right before our eyes. We have to be out front of that too. And in this approach or this conceptual picture is a way to get out front and help lead this change and help shape it in a positive way. So we've been concerned, the HBCU Geosciences Working Group, we tried to apply this to helping to understand and promote recruiting, or what NSF uses, people say, broadening participation in STEM. And we think the way to do that is we have to be culturally competent, and our message to younger people has to be culturally relevant. So if you're going to, and I think that's to anybody, it's not just minority populations. A lot of young people today, they want to solve problems. They know what the problems are, and they want to solve them. And if we're not speaking to that, they're not going to be happy, and we may be out of a job. So this sustainability model, it fits into this cultural relevancy in producing culturally competent students as well. Because that when we say culturally competent, it can exist, and we can talk about it amongst many different levels, but just holistically, culturally competent to have an advanced culture, to have a sustainable culture, to have a healthy culture. That's what we want, to have, as we have an opportunity, they're calling it the fourth industrial revolution now. We have an opportunity to help shape that, so we don't end up in the same place that we're trying to get away from, I hope. So what we think is important is this Lane Zucker talks about place-based education, and they use the local community as the starting place. So this comes back to this whole thing about cultural relevancy, interacting with the community and demonstrating that we're part of the community, and demonstrating and showing where these tax dollars as far as public, but it's really, if it's private as well, because they're getting the grants as well. Where we can help communities that are in need, and then we can help communities that are trying to change. They may not be destitute, they may not have problems, but they're trying to cope and keep up and be current and be ready for the future. So we think that this notion or idea of place-based education and models is the way to go as far as our higher education. Okay, so my degree says I'm a toxicologist, but I like art. But I didn't get into this, what were the basis of my talk, because I like art per se. I got into it because I like environmental science. And environmental science is interdisciplinary. And you can get out and do a lot of stuff and work with a lot of people. And I think you can be in environmental science, but if you're not open-minded, then you may have some issues. So thankfully, I'm not closed-minded. So I'm just going to go through some of these projects. All of these projects, when we got started with sustainability and student involvement at FAMU, it all came from the students. It didn't start with the faculty. Around 2014, we had a new president, Elmira Mango, and she elevated the Sustainability Council, which I had started or was the initial chair. She elevated it to the Sustainability Institute. So she decided that sustainability was going to get into the strategic planning and this whole thing of FAMU, not just sitting over there in the corner about the buildings, but across the curriculum too. So this is something our curriculum committee is working on as well, of how to get sustainability across the curriculum. So one of the things that we started was the Sustainable Youth Poster Competition. So again, just as in the syllabus, it was an opportunity for students to use their creative potential and show them that they had creative insights to do these poster competitions. So that started around 2013-14. But once the Sustainability Institute came up, then they sort of jumped in and they took this thing and decided they were going to call it the Art of Sustainability. And so we had this campus-wide art competition and exhibit. It was jury. There was a call for entries. And that's just the description. But again, the artists, the faculty that I mentioned before, Kabuya Bowens, she was instrumental in making this happen. And of course, the Sustainability Institute, the School of Architecture as well. Okay, so the Sustainability Institute, we did these things to try to get, this idea of sustainability across the campus, to see what people wanted to do, and also to get people thinking about their role and responsibility to the environment. So for this Earth Day, we had this open dialogue saying that we wanted to know what they were doing. So one of the artists came up with this idea about this leaf thing. I can't explain it. But so when they used the leaf is where people wrote their ideas. But see, the leaf was giving, I guess, a message about connecting and roots and all that stuff. You can interpret it any way you want, but you have to write your suggestions and stuff on that leaf, on those lines. So that we had 4 questions. What has FAMU rooted in you? How can you help FAMU grow? That's the same one again. And how can we make a good community at FAMU? So this was part of this Earth Day that we used, and used this sort of artistic influence to get more, find out what was on people's minds and get their input about how the Sustainability Institute was going to work, just overall what their idea was about sustainability and how it would manifest itself at FAMU. Okay, this is, we have this meeting, we've been doing this Food, Energy, Water Nexus Summit. I think we've done 4 now. We do it every 2 years. It's we call it an international summit. So again, we're getting these artists. And so we had one professor who started this environmental art action topics. And so she had these panels and these sessions at the summit, but with an art bent on these topics. Again, a different way of coming and getting people interested and getting people talking and participating. Okay, if I have, I hope I can do whatever, it doesn't matter. The lady in the blue, That is Dr. Elizabeth Hart. She's an endocrinologist. She comes from a family of doctors and physicians. She is the owner of the Brickler Art, AGV, Anderson Brickler Gallery. So that's her families are Anderson and Bricklers, they're all doctors. Well, she opened a museum and art gallery in her facility. They've had, I don't know how many exhibits. So we bring students over from campus. So we talk about, the title was about art, included about STEM, art, humanities, and medicine. Well, here's a physician who's concerned about community. So she does a lot of work with diabetic patients. So she's looking about trying to educate them about how they eat, what all these things that they do. So she thinks art is a way to help her do that or be more successful in the patient. So she started this gallery that's in her medical facility building. So this is a session we're having with a community member in the pink. The gentleman with the suit is a professor, a former professor at FAMU, Rabbani Muhammad. He's an architect. So we were meeting because she wants to expand the facility to house the museum in a larger space. And her building is near FAMU. We're on the south side of town, and we have some issues. And she's rooted right there, and she wants to have this impact. And she thinks, besides being a physician, she thinks this art gallery and all the programming activities that she has in the building will help do that. Okay, so at FAMU, we have an activity for all students. They start as freshmen. Under the accreditation, you have to do certain things. One of the things at FAMU is critical thinking, all the courses, all that. I know y'all are familiar with that somewhat. Okay, so what we did, myself and the artist, Pabulia Bowen, we went to the Right on FAMU, and with Anderson Brickler Gallery. We said, well, we have a proposal for the Right On project. And our proposal was that the students should study Margaret Collins, who was a well-known entomologist, and Ken Falana, who's a well-known artist. He's a FAMU professor, a former FAMU professor. She's a FAMU graduate, very well-known entomologist. So what our proposal turned into was Right On Collins and Falana. And so we gave them the bios, and I told you what they were. And so here was the competition guidelines. One of the things we did, we held a reception at the Anderson Brickler Gallery, and we held the awards. So the students had to go to the gallery to study Ken Falana. So Anderson Brickler Gallery had an exhibit of all his work. So they had to go to the gallery to do that. Of course, they had to go to the library to do the play. But then they had to write one paper, integrated paper, reflecting on Collins and Falana. So, we were trying to get them to see this connection between art and science. Because a lot of Falana's work is really environmental, from an environmental messaging. So we had these 7 questions they had to answer. And we had prizes. So he gave a talk as well that they had. Okay, so this is sort of going backwards now. Okay, so myself and Randy Abate He is a former law professor at FAMU School of Law. We started having these hosting these environmental law and justice symposiums. Because the law school has an environmental law. So this was our title, so that was the title, Empowering Environmental Justice Communities Locally and Globally. Well, that's one of our first Sustainable Youth Poster competitions, was in conjunction with this symposium. So I invited Professor Wells-Bowie, who's an architecture professor, but she's also a fiber artist. I asked her to jury this competition, and she agreed to do that. So she pulled her people together to evaluate it, came up with all the criteria for entry. So even back in 2013, I was doing what I said from the syllabus, getting students in all my classes to do this. So then I required the classes that year to enter into the Sustainable Youth Poster competition. And this was the flyer we put out. It's hard to see, but we did a call for entries. We put our little thing where the students can just put their phone. This is the criteria, all this stuff that the jury put together. This was the winner. Candy Allen is now graduated. She got her BA in Fine Arts from FAMU. She came up with this beautiful rendition called Ring Thumb So Knowledge. Well, there's a little part to the story. She took my class, Fundamentals of Environmental Science, so she was one of the students that I said you have to require to enter the competition. She entered, and she won first place. I wasn't on the jury. So now what's interesting is a lot of the students that are in the gen ed course, it's science for non-science majors. So they are very reluctant to speak up in class. They don't know anything. We don't know the whole story, which of course they do. I try to remind them that they know a lot more than they think, and we finally come to an agreement that they do. Now, Candy was one of those students, but it also shows you about this whole idea of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and communication. Because here she is talking about science in her interpreting it her way, right? Because remember, we had the theme, empowering environmental justice communities locally and globally. So she, what does this say? She says her poster, which is original, a student sits down to study a book in which she learns of environmental issues that affect us all. As she studies the book, the pages begin to flower and blossom and grow. Coming from an agricultural community, Candy is from Gaston County, Florida, which is a very rural community, very low literacy rate for certain populations. And so coming from Gaston County, Florida, and Quincy is the city, the main seat, linked closely to whatever. She said her biggest mission is to enlighten those who may not be considered educated, well-read, or even particularly interested in the environmental fight, to take notice and recognize the changes and effects they have on the world around them. Images are universal, and color speaks every language. Art is the tongue of the young and old, of kings and commoners, and through my image, I hope to reach a broader spectrum of onlookers that may never walk the halls of academia. The planet belongs to us all, and it is our duty to involve every human being in the works or the world to preserve it. So I think this is speaks to the title of my talk, because here is an art student that's interested in environmental science. She's interested in doing what all of us should be doing, especially scientists, and that is communicating science to the public. But what this shows us, if we collaborate and be transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, then we can team up with people who can do the translating for us. In art, in a whole lot of other things, or a lot of other disciplines, are ways to do that translation. And this is she was, what was she, maybe well, she took my class, she had to be no more than a junior. She's probably a sophomore when she took my class. Mostly I have freshmen and sophomore in my class. So that's my talk. I bought, if I can get the light, this work was one of the group projects at one of those fundamentals or gen ed course. And this was their creative project. None of them are artists. So these are all, mostly in these classes I get business, journalism majors, mostly. Mostly business and journalism. And so this group, mostly freshmen, sophomore, produced this collage to communicate what they learned in the class, or an aspect of what they learned in the class. And then, if Karen can help me, I bought this piece, so you can see it. So this is the work that she produced, and we're going to get it framed and hang it up. So that's my talk, and I'm open for questions.
Start with Marilyn.
So thank you for this talk. It's really original, and a lot of it is really relevant, I'd say, right now, just at many scales, and this institution, this department and stuff. So I'm going to give you a devil's advocate question here. I'm going to challenge you as an expert, but know that I'm really on the same page as you. And this is a question for me, too. How do you measure this? Okay.
How do you measure it?
We're in an institution where you can count students that we graduate, you can count papers, and most importantly, you can count research dollars and grants. And I think there's an important sample bias in how the hierarchy works and how to really address this issue where you talk about the cost model of higher ed and perceptions of it. But in a way, it's like an institution like Auburn can say how many millions of dollars of grants we bring in, but can't always show this picture and explain the importance of cultural competency or talk about the role of these values and stuff. So it's like, how do institutions make this more objective in practice? If that makes sense?
It makes sense. I think it's up to the faculty. Because it's the faculty that are deciding what goes on in the department. It's the faculty that's deciding the curriculum. It's the faculty that are deciding the criteria for tenure and promotion. It's the faculty that's deciding what kind of student they want to produce so they can be employable, so they can make an impact.
Well, then I might follow up by saying, what if that faculty is primarily hired to optimize the research dollars, the traditional metrics and stuff like that. I mean, that's really a lot of times the situation we're in. The measurables have kind of a bias, you might say.
I'm going to say the faculty, I bet you there's a faculty on this campus that can come up with a way to measure it. Because, well, the point is, somebody on all these campuses and these faculty now that are here now, somebody is going to be a provost, somebody's going to be a president, somebody's going to be a department chair or dean. or sit on SACs, or sit in some professional society. And you know, like I said, this theme of integration, arts, science, humanities, was a theme for the American Geophysical Union meeting this year in San Francisco.
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned during your talk, and I think Karen mentioned it earlier in the introduction, a commission on geosciences for the HBCUs.
Yes.
How big a group is it? Let me tell you first, the reason I'm asking, I know years ago when I was trying to compile some information about, like, as far as sending out recruitment literature to attract candidates for a job from underrepresented groups, and we also are always looking at how do we recruit students from underrepresented groups into our programs. And what I recall going back and looking through all the HBCUs, at least at that time, the time I'm thinking was probably around 2008 or 10 or something like that, there were no geoscience degree offering departments.
When you say geoscience, you mean geology,
Well,
geography?
that's back at the,
Yeah,
when
no,
I'm
I-
looking at it was
yeah.
geology, you know.
Okay, right. No, that's correct, and there still isn't. Most of the HBCUs offer degrees in environmental science, or some aspect of sustainability, or their land grant. They're already doing it in all of their land grant activities. So no, there's only one HBCU, maybe two, but the one that I know of is Fort Valley, that had a geology, geography, I think geology department. So everybody else, at FAMU, it's the School of the Environment. We've been operating since since '98.
Do you have a sense of how much, I guess, traditional geoscience they would get as part of those environmental science programs?
Not traditional, no, because the faculty are from a lot of different disciplines. So it's built more around, I'll just take ours, it's built more around environmental science, coastal. We have a big project in human interactions in coastal environments from NOAA. That's been a major project at FAMU. We've done a lot of stuff in environmental justice, health disparities. Plus, we work across disciplines, so we're public health, agriculture, things like that. But you asked your question about the geosciences working group. We have about 20 faculty from about 25 institutions that are involved in that geoscience working group. One of the things we are just finishing up, we had a grant. We've been doing a lot of collaboration with Carleton College in the Integrate project, which is over now. But one of the last things we are still wrapping up, we took some of those modules that were created, and we helped build some of those modules, and we tested them at about 14 of the HBCU campuses to see, the student reception, how the faculty, all that. We're still wrapping that up. We presented that at last year's, at the Earth Educators Rendezvous meeting this year. Then we also have a project that's being run out of Savannah State where we're looking at geoscience, pedagogy courses in teacher preparation at HBCU campuses. Because again, about getting groups, underrepresented groups in the geosciences, it's at these middle school teachers is where the science gets started. So we're trying to see what's going on and then try to promote and encourage more of that geoscience. So we're trying to basically to create a toolkit, for lack of a better word. Once we see what's going on, help give people a pathway to get more of that into the curriculum.
Thank you.
And those not familiar with Integrate, it's a large NSF project that brought people from around the country to build undergraduate teaching and learning modules from a geoscience perspective. Kim?
So, non-geoscience person in the room.
Okay.
And so, but you know, you too, this is a good question, okay. We're sitting together. So one of the things that I'm always talking about when I'm going out trying to recruit and thinking about like the graduate program and different things like that is the fact that, you know, for me, it's really hard when I think about geosciences because, and even thinking about the undergrad level, getting students to come in and want to major in, because they don't teach it in, you know, at the K-12 level, right? So you're talking about that. In middle school, they're not really learning about the geosciences. They don't take geosciences in high schools most places, unless you maybe you're in Texas or somewhere where, you know, you got oil, and so these are what the kids are going to go to. So you think about these gateway courses where you might have a class like this where you have a journalism major or somebody come in, because when you talk about an 18-year-old deciding what they're going to do for the rest of their lives, they have no idea. So you have these classes and, you know, maybe they come in and maybe you'll convince somebody that, hey, this is pretty cool. I never knew I could do this, right? And so now this might be a path that I'm considering. Long preamble to say, for the kids who have come through this and done this, have you converted any students and had them want to be geoscience or environmental sciences majors, or have anybody gone down that pathway who started off as a journalism major, took their class and said, you know what, this is something that I'm interested in doing now?
Yes, we've had some, but not a lot. We've had some that make up their own mind, and we have some that stand out in the class, and I say, you need to switch. But my bigger point is that we're not going to get a whole lot of STEM majors, underrepresented group of kids. We're going to get more. So I think we have to look at this whole thing differently. And our objective should be to get people to become literate in STEM and geoscience. Because we need journalism to communicate the story, to inform and educate the public. And from that, and getting people to start teaching at the right age, you can look to the future to change that. So we should open our arms and try to get geoscience, whatever you want to call it, across the curriculum. Make people literate, so you can have informed citizenry to make informed decisions and to be able to critically think and analyze what's going on.
Yeah, go ahead. Kind of going off of what you just said, like outside of academia, I know you talked about the gallery that kind of promotes like public health with, you know, the use of art and diabetes. Like what other fields would you like to see, like outside of academia, like learning how to combine like environmental science with art? Like what do you think would be like useful communities outside of academia that could benefit from that?
Well, it could be anything. I'm working on a project where we're trying to do an art science festival. And one of the venues where things are happening is in malls. We go where the people are. So when you say, you know, it could be anything, anybody. I think what we as geoscientists want to remind ourselves and remind the public, we're sort of disconnected from, you know, the environment. In Florida, we have Publix, so we go get our food from Publix, and the 8th grader student who's not getting any STEM, they get their food from Publix. They don't know anything about the cow and the farm, and the fertilizer, and how it impacts. So again, we just need a broader, we have to understand that first, that people are disconnected from the environment. So we need to get people reconnected. And that may not be through STEM. Maybe it's just getting people outdoors and enjoying it. So that's, again, that's like that culturally relevant. Maybe just getting people outdoors, getting connected to the environment, doing things outside. That may help inspire people to go down.
Any other questions? Thoughts?
Get one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Are HBCUs looking at getting like geology, geography programs? Do you see maybe a push for that
Not
in your working group?
Not that I'm aware of, because from being involved with Integrate and Kathy and Duca and going to GSA, AGU, a lot of the geology, a lot of these programs are closing because they're not getting any students. And I think in part because, again, we've become these insulated things and we haven't expanded or developed our relevancy. We haven't been able to justify our relevancy, and that's very relevant. But if you can't translate that where people can understand it and support it, then these departments are closing down. So I don't think that then, with that information, that any institution, well, not that they couldn't, but that would be the path people would take. Ready.
Can you talk about the structure for the environmental science program on your campus? Because we have a PhD program that's 5 college, 10 different departments involved. And so it's complicated. We try to integrate faculty, students from different training backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so in order to be those programs to be successful, so do you have any advice, strategy, how to bring everybody together with the different needs, different backgrounds?
Well, let me just say first, and I'll give you a little background on what happened at Gragg. I think, not that it's as simple as it sounds, but we just have to bring people together and start talking. And I would say, maybe do that around food. And to have some, and start having conversations on how, but also you always, everybody wants to know how it's going to benefit them. But also you have to get people to start thinking about how it benefits the department and the institution. Because, that's why we're here. That's how we get paid, right? That this institution is successful. At the department level, recruiting students, graduating students. So I think that's one of the conversations that's sort of missing with faculty, especially at public institutions. I've been working for the state of Florida, right? And I get a paycheck every 2 weeks. But nobody has ever said to me, well, your department only has X number of students and you're not generating enough FTEs to cover your salary or this budget of this department. So that's sort of a reality check that's not being discussed. And I think that's important. Now that may not sound, but what does that have to do with? I think that'll get people together if they want to be relevant and not because some bean counter is counting something and then they say, well, we don't need them because they're not meeting this metric thing, right? So I know faculty want to stay in the lane, especially young faculty, but I think people need to be more informed of how the institution works and what their contribution and how they have to keep relevant, not just in their discipline, right? In terms of the institution itself and the department. But at FAMU, there was a plan and there wasn't a plan. Obviously there was this, we started out as the Environmental Sciences Institute, and we started because that founding dean determined that he was going to get it done. He was able to get it going. And it started with a master's program. And then from there, we got a PhD program. And it was the first PhD in environmental science in the State University System of Florida. Then from there, we got a bachelor's degree in environmental science. And the last one we did was environmental studies. Now we're developing a PhD in sustainability science. We don't have a lot of students, but we're contributing a lot to these numbers that are deficient. Our success for what it is, I think what happened and allowed us to be successful, we were independent from the beginning. We were never in a school or a college. So we were able to do more of our own thing. We didn't have to, you just said you had all these different, we didn't have to pull anything together. We just had to make this unit work. And we were always open and willing to collaborate. The environmental, we have a reputation at FAMU is that we've always reached out and pulled other units into our research and activities. And even on our supervisory for the doctoral committees. So I would say that is that we didn't have that administrative weight on top of us. We had the weight of the provost, but that was it. We didn't have anything between us. And today, the president is from the unit. We started in the environment. So that was close.